There is a moment, and if you're honest with yourself, you've already had it, where you sit quietly and wonder why your life hasn't matched the picture in your head. You've read the books, you've started the goals, you've told yourself, this year would be different. And yet, here you are, running the same loops, making the same mistakes. Feeling the same tightening in your chest when you think about where you wanted to be by now. That feeling isn't a weakness. It isn't failure. It is your brain doing exactly what it was trained to do. The question is, who did the training? Most people go through their entire lives never asking that question. They assume the mind they were born with is the mind they're stuck with. They assume their patterns of thinking, the anxiety, the self-doubt, the procrastination, the way they shrink back from opportunity are simply who they are. They've confused their conditioning with their identity, and that confusion costs them everything. It costs them the career they could have built, the money they could have made, the relationships they could have deepened, and the version of themselves they could have become. Not because they weren't smart enough or talented enough, but because no one ever taught them that the brain is not a fixed object. It is a living, changing, sculptable instrument, and you have far more control over it than you have ever been told. Sharon Begley spent decades as one of the world's most respected science journalists, RTING on the frontiers of neuroscience and the emerging science of the mind, which she found particularly in her collaboration with the Dalai Lama and the world's leading brain researchers was something that should have rewritten every self-help book ever published. The brain can change itself, not inspirationally, physically, structurally. The neural pathways that define how you think, how you feel, how you react under pressure, and how you perceive the world, those pathways are not set in stone. They are set in biology, and biology responds to experience. This is the science of neuroplasticity, and it is the most important discovery about the human mind in the last 100 years. But more importantly, it is practical, it is actionable, and it is urgent. Because here is the truth that no one wants to say out loud. Time is not neutral. Every year you spend running on autopilot. Every year you let your default patterns drive your decisions. Every year you leave your mind untrained. That is a year of compounding loss. The patterns deepen, the neural grooves get more entrenched. The window for transformation doesn't close, but it does narrow. Not because you become incapable of change, but because untrained minds are self-reinforcing. They build walls and call them personalities, and then they spend the rest of their lives defending those walls. This is not meant to frighten you, it is meant to wake you up. Because the same science that tells us the brain can get stuck also tells us exactly how to unstick it. And the lessons ahead, 7 of them, drawn from the deepest research into how the mind actually works, are not motivational platitudes. They are operating instructions for a brain you've been living inside your whole life. Without ever reading the manual, the first lesson begins with a concept so counterintuitive that most people resist it on instinct. You are not your thoughts. This sounds like something printed on a coffee mug, but the neuroscientific reality behind it is profound and practical. When researchers began studying the brains of long-term meditators, Tibetan monks who had spent tens of thousands of hours in contemplative practice, they found something startling. The monks didn't just think differently, their brains looked different. The areas associated with attention, emotional regulation, and self-awareness were physically enlarged. The areas associated with reactivity and anxiety were quieter. But perhaps most importantly, these monks demonstrated a cognitive capacity that most people in the modern world have almost completely lost. The ability to observe a thought without being consumed by it. In ordinary brain function, a thought arises and immediately becomes reality. If you think I'm going to fail this presentation, your brain doesn't file that under hypothesis to be tested. It treats it as fact. Your stress hormones spike, working memory narrow. Your body goes into a low-grade fight-or-flight response. And suddenly you are failing the presentation not because of your skills, but because your brain believed its own story. This is sometimes called cognitive fusion, the state of being fused with your thoughts, unable to distinguish between the thought and the thing it represents. And cognitive fusion is the invisible engine behind most of the self-sabotage in human life. The monks had developed what researchers call metacognitive awareness, the ability to watch the mind think, to notice a thought arising, to recognize it as a thought rather than a truth, and to choose how to respond rather than react automatically. And here is the crucial point. This isn't a mystical gift. It's a trainable skill. When you spend even a few minutes each day practicing the deliberate observation of your own thinking, not judging it, not trying to stop it, just watching it the way you'd watch clouds pass across the sky, you begin to loosen the grip that automatic thought has over your behavior. You start to create what psychologists call psychological space between stimulus and response, and in that space lives your freedom. The modern application of this lesson is everywhere. Think about how many financial decisions are made not from strategy but from fear thoughts that were never questioned. Think about how many talented freelancers undercharge not because the market won't bear their rates, but because the thought "I'm not worth that much" arises and is immediately treated as market research. Think about how many entrepreneurs abandon ideas at the first sign of resistance because the thought "this isn't working" fuses instantly with the belief that they themselves are failing. The skill of diffusing from your thoughts, of saying, "I notice I'm having the thought that this is too hard," rather than "this is too hard," is not a subtle distinction. It is the difference between being driven by your mind and driving it. The second lesson is one that the business world has been learning the hard way through every economic disruption of the last 20 years. Your attention is your most valuable asset, and it is under siege. Sharon Begley's research into the neuroscience of attention reveals something that the attention economy doesn't want you to know. The brain's capacity for focused attention is not just a productivity tool. It is the mechanism through which neural change happens. Neuroplasticity follows attention. The brain physically reinforces whatever it pays sustained attention to. This means that in a world engineered to fragment your focus, to pull you from notification to notification, from outrage to outrage, from dopamine hit to dopamine hit, you are not just becoming less productive. You are literally reshaping your brain in the direction of distraction. You are training yourself every single day to be less capable of the deep thinking that creates real value. Consider what this means in practical terms. The rise of AI in the global economy is not a future threat. It is a present reality that is already eliminating jobs that require routine thinking, pattern matching, and information retrieval. What AI cannot do, at least not yet, is the kind of integrative, creative, emotionally nuanced, deeply focused thinking that comes from a trained human mind. The freelancer, the entrepreneur, the creative professional who can sit with a problem for 3 uninterrupted hours and emerge with a genuinely original solution is not being replaced. They're becoming exponentially more valuable. But that capacity for deep work is not the default setting of a modern brain. It has to be cultivated deliberately, protected fiercely, and practiced consistently. A common mistake people make when they try to improve their focus is that they treat it as a willpower problem. They tell themselves to just focus and then to feel defeated when they can't. But attention is not a matter of willpower, it is a matter of training. The brain's default mode network, which is the network that activates when we're not focused on a specific task, is extraordinarily powerful and constantly pulling us toward mind-wandering, rumination, and social monitoring. This was useful on the savannah. It is catastrophic in the knowledge economy. The way to train attention is not to fight the default mode network, but to develop the competing network, the task-positive network, through progressive deliberate practice. Start with 20 minutes of single-pointed focus on one task. No tabs, no phone, no quick checks. Do this daily and increase the duration slowly. Within weeks, the structural changes in your brain are measurable. Your capacity for the deep work that creates real income, real influence, and real creative output begins to compound. The third lesson moves into territory that feels uncomfortable. For many high achievers, the role of emotion in intelligent thinking. The old model of the mind treated emotion and reason as opposites, as though becoming smarter meant becoming more detached, more analytical, more robotic. The new neuroscience has demolished this model entirely. Antonio Damasio's research on patients with damage to the emotional centers of the brain revealed something astonishing. Without emotion, decision-making collapses. People who lose access to emotional processing through strokes, tumors, or injury become unable to make even simple decisions, not because their logical faculties are impaired, but because emotion provides a signal that tells the brain which options matter. Emotion is not the enemy of good thinking. It is the substrate of it. Begley's work extends this insight in a direction that is immediately relevant to anyone navigating the modern world. Emotional states are trainable. The research on what scientists call affective style, your baseline, emotional tone, your resilience after setbacks, your capacity for positive engagement, shows that these are not fixed personality traits. They are habits of neural activation. People who tend toward negativity, rumination, and anxiety are not broken. They have developed strong neural habits in those directions. And just as physical habits can be changed through consistent practice, emotional habits can be changed through what researchers call emotional regulation training. This has profound implications for anyone trying to build something. The founder who spirals into catastrophic thinking after a bad quarter isn't experiencing reality clearly. They're experiencing a trained neural habit. The creative professional who takes criticism as existential rejection isn't being appropriately sensitive. They're running a neural program that was written long ago and has never been updated. The ability to move through difficult emotions quickly, to feel the setback, acknowledge it fully, and return to a functional state without being derailed is not a talent. It is a skill, and like all skills rooted in the brain, it improves with deliberate practice. One of the most powerful practices Begley documents is what researchers call emotional labeling. When you name an emotion, not perform it, not suppress it, but specifically and accurately name it, you activate the prefrontal cortex and simultaneously reduce activity in the amygdala. You literally calm the brain's alarm system by engaging its language system. The next time a wave of anxiety, frustration or dread arrives before a high-stakes conversation or a difficult decision, try this. Stop and say to yourself, with precision, I am feeling anxious about the uncertainty of how this will be received. Not I'm freaking out. Not everything is fine. A precise, honest label. The neuroscience suggests that this simple act of accurate naming reduces emotional intensity significantly and clears the space for clearer thinking. The fourth lesson is perhaps the most practically urgent of all, especially for anyone trying to build wealth, build a business, or navigate the volatile terrain of the modern economy, the science of belief and its direct relationship to behavior. This goes far deeper than the pop psychology version of believe in yourself. What Begley and the researchers she documents are pointing to is a specific mechanism. The brain is a prediction machine, and the predictions it makes are based on your beliefs. Every belief you hold is not a passive opinion. It is an active filter through which all new information is processed, and a set of standing instructions to your behavior. If you believe, at a deep level, that money is something other people have access to but you don't, that belief doesn't stay in your head. It shapes what opportunities you notice, how you present yourself in negotiations, whether you take risks that could change your financial life, how you respond when success starts to arrive. The brain unconsciously discards information that contradicts core beliefs and amplifies information that confirms them. This is called confirmation bias, and it is not a flaw in human reasoning, it is a feature. The brain is conserving energy by running on established priors, but when those priors are limiting, they create a world that perfectly confirms the limitations you were afraid were true. The actionable insight here is not to simply think positive. That is the shallow version of a deep truth. The deeper version is this. Beliefs change through experience, not through affirmation. You cannot think your way out of a limiting belief. You have to act your way out of it. The research on behavioral activation, which is rooted in cognitive behavioral neuroscience, consistently shows that the most effective way to change a belief is to take a small, specific action that contradicts it, observe the outcome, and allow that outcome to update the brain's predictive model. If you believe you're not the kind of person who can charge premium prices for your work, the path forward is not to repeat "I am worth it" in the mirror. It is to raise your price by 20% on the next client conversation, survive the discomfort, and let the result, whatever it is, begin to revise the belief from the inside. This is why so many mindset programs fail. They operate at the level of thought without touching the level of experience. They give people new stories to tell themselves without giving them new experiences to anchor those stories to. The brain isn't convinced by words, it's convinced by evidence. And evidence is created through action. Small, consistent, courage-requiring action that quietly dismantles the architecture of the beliefs that have been holding you in place. The fifth lesson reaches into the relationship between stress, the brain, and performance, and it challenges one of the most pervasive myths in modern culture, that stress is the enemy of success. The reality, as documented in the emerging neuroscience of stress response, is far more nuanced. Stress is not inherently destructive. The body's stress response, a surge of cortisol and adrenaline, the sharpening of attention, the mobilization of energy evolved specifically to enhance performance in high-demand situations. The problem is not stress. The problem is chronic, unregulated stress that never finds resolution. And the difference between those two things is determined almost entirely by how the brain interprets the stress. Experience Kelly McGonigal research, which intersects powerfully with Begley's neurological framework, demonstrated that people who believed stress was harmful had significantly worse health outcomes than people who experienced similar levels of stress but believed it was a natural part of engagement. The belief changed the biology. When you interpret the physical sensations of stress, the racing heart, the heightened alertness, the surge of energy as your body preparing you to rise to a challenge rather than as warning signs of imminent breakdown, you get a fundamentally different neurological response. The blood vessels stay relaxed. The brain stays in a performance state rather than a threat state. The hormonal cocktail shifts toward one associated with courage and resilience rather than panic and shutdown. The application of this lesson in a high-stakes modern context is direct. Before a difficult client pitch, before a negotiation, before any high-pressure performance moment, the trained mind doesn't try to calm down. It reframes "my heart is racing, my body's getting ready." This isn't denial. It isn't toxic positivity. It is a scientifically validated cognitive reframe that changes the actual neurological state you bring into the room. The untrained mind experiences stress as evidence that something is wrong. The trained mind experiences stress as fuel. And over time, with practice, this reframe becomes automatic. It becomes the default interpretation, and your baseline performance under pressure begins to rise. The sixth lesson is one that the productivity industry has buried under layers of optimization frameworks and morning routines. The irreplaceable role of rest and unconscious processing. In the trained mind, There is a cultural mythology particularly powerful in entrepreneurial and high-achieving circles that equates busyness with seriousness and rest with weakness. Begley's research exposes this as not just philosophically misguided but neurologically catastrophic. The brain does not do its most important work when it's consciously active. Some of its most sophisticated processing, the integration of information, the formation of creative connections, the consolidation of learning into long-term memory happens during rest, during sleep, and during the unfocused wandering of the default mode network. The concept of incubation, the phenomenon where solutions to difficult problems emerge spontaneously after a period of deliberate disengagement, is not mystical. It is the result of the brain's unconscious processing networks working on the problem after the conscious mind has stepped back. The writer who goes for a walk and suddenly knows how to resolve the structural problem in their manuscript. That entrepreneur who wakes at 3 in the morning with a business model that had eluded them for weeks. These are not accidents of inspiration. They are the predictable output of a brain that was given the space to do its deepest work. The practical, what's the implication is this: the schedule that never includes genuine rest is not the schedule of a high performer. It is the schedule of someone who doesn't understand how their most valuable cognitive resource actually works. Strategic rest, real rest, not scrolling, not passive consumption, but genuine mental disengagement, is not a reward for hard work. It is a component of it. The trained mind protects sleep with the same ferocity with which it protects deep work time, because sleep is when the previous day's learning gets cemented, when emotional experiences get processed and integrated, and when the brain literally cleans itself of the metabolic waste products that accumulate during active thinking. Chronic sleep deprivation doesn't just make you tired, it structurally impairs the prefrontal cortex, the seat of judgment, planning, and emotional regulation, and it does so in ways you cannot feel directly, which makes it one of the most dangerous forms of self-sabotage available. To a modern person, the seventh and final lesson is the one that makes all the others possible, and the one that most people spend their entire lives resisting. It is this: the trained mind is not built through insight, it is built through practice. Sustained, consistent, unglamorous practice. Not the inspiration of reading a book like this one. Not the temporary elevation of a great seminar or a powerful podcast episode. Practice the kind that happens on Tuesday morning when you're tired and you don't feel like it, and there is no one watching and no immediate reward visible. The neuroscience here is unambiguous. Neural change requires repetition. The myelin sheaths that insulate neural pathways and make them faster and more automatic are built through repeated activation. The emotional regulation circuits that allow you to stay calm under pressure are built through repeated practice of regulation, including especially in small low-stakes moments that most people dismiss as unimportant. Every time you choose to pause before reacting to a frustrating email, every time you redirect your attention back to your work after it wanders, every time you name an emotion instead of acting it out, every time you sit in discomfort without immediately reaching for distraction. These are not small things, these are repetitions, and repetitions build structure. Structure builds capacity. Capacity builds the life you actually want to live. The biggest mistake people make on this journey is waiting for the right conditions to begin practicing. They will start meditating when life settles down. They will work on their focus when the current project is finished. They will address their limiting beliefs when they have more evidence that change is possible. But the brain doesn't change in ideal conditions. It changes in the conditions that exist right now. And the person who practices under imperfect conditions, inconsistently and perfectly but consistently enough, that person will outgrow the person waiting for perfect conditions every single time. In the AI-driven, freelance-oriented, constantly disrupted economy we are now living in, the competitive advantage is no longer primarily informational. Information is everywhere and increasingly free. The competitive advantage is cognitive. It is the ability to think with depth when others are skimming the surface, to regulate emotion when others are reactive, to maintain focus when everything is engineered to fracture it, to hold a long-term vision when the short-term noise is deafening. These are not soft skills. They are the hard infrastructure of a mind capable of creating real value in the world, and they are built, neuron by neuron, through the practice you choose or choose not to do today. There are people reading this, listening to this, who have already had every insight contained in these pages before. Not these exact words perhaps, but the recognition, the moment of clarity, the feeling of, yes, this is what I need to change. And then life resumed, the inbox refilled, the urgent crowded out the important. The insight faded like a dream remembered, only in fragments by news. And a year passed, and another, and the gap between where they are and where they know they could be grew quietly wider, padded on all sides with the softest cues that there was still time. There is still time, but it is not infinite, and more importantly, it is not free. Every day the mind runs on its current programming is a day that programming gets more deeply encoded. The neural pathways of avoidance become highways. The habits of distraction become the default architecture of thought. The beliefs that limit you become the invisible frame through which you see every opportunity and every threat. Not because you are weak, not because you lack intelligence or talent or drive, but because you have not yet decided truly irreversibly, decided that training your mind is not optional, that it is not a luxury for people with fewer responsibilities, that it is, in fact, the most important work you will ever do, because every other work you do is done by the mind you have built or failed to build. Sharon Begley spent her career translating the hardest science of the brain into language that what could actually change lives. What she found, ultimately, was not a complicated message. It was a simple one with enormous implications. The brain you have today is not the brain you are locked into. You are not your patterns. You are not your history. You are not the thoughts that have been running on autopilot since childhood. You are the one who can learn to watch those thoughts, redirect that attention, regulate those emotions, update those beliefs, reframe that stress, protect that rest, and show up imperfectly, consistently, courageously for the practice. That'll slowly, incrementally, irreversibly make you into someone your current self can barely imagine. The only question that remains is the one you already know the answer to, even if you've been avoiding it. Not whether change is possible. The science settled that. Not whether you're capable. You already know you are. The question is simpler and harder than either of those. It is when. Because the cost of waiting is not paid in a single dramatic moment of regret. It is paid in the slow accumulation of a life that never quite became what it could have been. In the version of yourself that existed only as potential, visited occasionally in moments of rare quiet, and then set aside again for later. Later. Always later. The mind you need is not waiting for you in the future. It is waiting for you to build it right now. With the next thought you choose to observe instead of obey. The next distraction you choose to redirect instead of follow. The next limiting belief you choose to act against instead of accept. The next moment of stress you choose to reframe instead of flee. This is how the trained mind is built. Not in a moment of inspiration. In 1,000 ordinary moments of choice. The window is open. The science is clear. The path is yours. Begin.